Okay, it's two past half the hour. Let's get started. Welcome to the sixth episode of Think Travel Payments, the webinar series in association with Finmont. My name is Paul van Alphen, and in today's session, we'll talk all about hospitality, the hotel payment ecosystem. We have two guests today, well, at least one for now, and hopefully a second will follow in a bit. And let me just welcome Anna Arjones from MasterCard. Anna, welcome. Good that you could join.
Thank you so much. And perfect pronunciation of my last name.
So maybe a little bit about your role within MasterCard.
Yeah, so I'm part of a team called the travel team. We look after partnerships with different travel partners within the ecosystem. And I particularly look after hotels. I focus mainly on payments between travel intermediaries and hotels, but I also have some initiatives relating payments between travelers and hotels direct. So thank you so much for inviting me. It's really great to be here with you today and hopefully with James soon. And looking forward to the conversation.
Okay. Yeah, he will hopefully join in a bit and he will do the introduction then. And again, thanks for joining. And Anna is my go-to person whenever I want to really do a deep dive into anything around payments for the hospitality space, which in my experience over the last 20 years has been a slow moving, it's a massive market. We'll see that later, but also slow moving when it comes to payment strategy and payment handling. And the idea for today is to get a high level impression of, what are the different variables in the equation, what are the mechanics, if it's in a B2B setting or also on property. So where a customer pays at a check-in, check-out, or during their stay, and to demystify some of the things inside the black box for hotel payments, hotel payment ecosystem. So having said that, I'll just click this away. We'll start off with some housekeeping. This is Zoom. There is a Q&A box that you can open, and you can ask any questions you have in that box. We'll keep an eye on them, either in between the different topics or at the end, we'll try to cover them. As with the previous episodes, also this episode will be recorded and will be made available through a link with Finmont, but also on my own YouTube channel. We have a dedicated page on LinkedIn as well. You can follow it, then you'll also get the invitation. So you see the announcements of the next two episodes that are remaining for this series. Okay. Talking about the series and the episodes, so we already covered 5 of them. We have 3 remaining today. Hotel payment ecosystem, as already mentioned, and in the new year we'll continue with fraud and risk management, and we'll wrap it up for this season with B2B payments, and I'm pretty sure that that's also in your domain. But we'll look at then also at B2B payments between travel intermediaries, all the different flavors that are out there, and also the different suppliers, if it's airlines, hotels, or others as well. So that will be an interesting one as well. Okay, for today, hotel payment ecosystem. Let me say in advance that, or upfront that, I was attending your session recently on the Academy on the Web, and you did a very ambitious effort to try to squeeze it into 1 hour. And it is very difficult, of course, to touch all the aspects and it go into a bit of level of detail, but we're trying to give a good overview of the ecosystem, the landscape itself, the distribution models, the fact that it's omni-channel, that there are multiple touch points within the hotel payment ecosystem, the role of travel intermediaries, travel agencies, wholesalers, bed banks, for instance, but also GDSs and tour operators. We'll then zoom in on what's a hot topic for the last years already, the use of virtual cards as payment rails in hospitality to connect the sellers and the suppliers. And then hopefully by then James will also be back, but he will definitely take us through what are the complexities of onboarding a hotel chain, an individual property with a payment provider, and the ownership structure and the setup of a hotel, who's owning the bricks, who's managing the hotel, is it part of a chain, is it individual, and how does that work, from a payment acceptance perspective, especially if you do business, in multiple countries, if you accept guest payments from around the world. And we'll wrap up with some latest industry news. Okay. I try to set the scene here with, and I must admit, I asked ChatGPT, please tell me, how would you see the hospitality landscape? How is it split up? And it came back with a number of these columns. And obviously, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I think it visualizes also that it's a very diverse, very complex, very global landscape, which drives the drivers are the columns here. So the ownership models, it's independent hotels and chain hotels. The service level models, 1-star, 5-star, full service, limited service. What's the addressable market? Is it business hotels? Is it resort hotels? Is it a casino hotel on the Strip in Las Vegas, for instance, or an airport hotel? How are they operated? And also, other flavors. So before I jump into the travel intermediaries, and I know you gave a very nice, elaboration, explanation of these different markets. How do you see what is the main characteristics that play a role from a payment perspective? What's driving the payment strategies for these hotels mainly?
Yeah, I was actually going to say that. I think one of the things that is most important for us to understand in the context of this webinar is that the ownership model has an impact on how the payments are processed, at the hotel level. And I'm talking about both. I'm talking about B2C payments as well as B2B. So an independent hotel is a hotel that operates independently, and therefore they can make their own decisions when it comes to payments, how they process them, what type of payments they accept, etc. When it comes to chain hotels, the model can be more hybrid, depending on whether the hotel chain or the hotel group, I should say, is the one managing the payments, or that activity is, it's derived to the hotel property. You can also have some instances where there is some payments that are managed by the hotel group and some payments by the hotel property. So that's why it's so complex, right? Because there is a lot of different models floating around in this ecosystem. And it's important that we understand them, and as well as payment providers, that we make solutions that can adapt to all the different models in the hotel industry.
Mm-hmm. And where on the right-hand side, you see the travel intermediaries. But before we go there, I think, and probably James, once he joins, he will elaborate later on that as well, that where maybe historically, you had a hardware terminal and you had a direct connection with a local acquirer, and the only payment touch point was basically the check-in desk or the front desk. I think that's now way more. There's a kiosk. There is, people can pay on their mobile. They can pay a check-in, check-out. They might have other forms of payment as well, and it's more. For instance, the PMSs, the cloud-based PMSs, they play a more active role in the payment value chain. Can you say that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a couple of things, right? I think the payment aspect of the hotel is taking a more prominent role because travelers actually are swifted to one hotel or another, depending on sometimes whether they have their preferred payment method. And we've seen this in recent surveys. So we've seen how, having the payment of choice of the traveler can be determinant to book one hotel or another for 21% of the travelers. To your point, now the traditional payment journey that existed before, where somebody was booking a room and then they were executing the payment face-to-face, has evolved massively. And I will dare to say that evolution has, probably made 90% of its journey in the last 5 years. And that's because of the digitization, the needs of the customers. COVID also plays a big role in, the self-check-in and self-checkout technologies. It existed before, but, demand increased during that time, and it continued on until today. And to be able to provide all those services and to be able to cater for all the travelers' needs, you need to have systems that are integrated within the hotel ecosystem. And that's not just, the restaurant or the spa or the reception. That's the systems that hotels use to, operate like the PMS, as you said. And for everyone that may not be aware on the webinar, the PMS is the solution or the technology that hotels use to manage all the operations of the hotels. So the fact that hotels are using this system, it requires now for POS or payment terminals to be integrated to this PMS. But not only that, as you said, you need digital terminals, you need kiosks as well, because some people like to self-check-in themselves at reception. Some people like to interact with receptionists, so you need to have both models. And as well, you need obviously, very sophisticated systems when you process payments online, because as you know, and you're going to talk about this in your next session, fraud and risks are very high when we talk about online payments. So that requires also hotels to have solutions and technology that is more advanced than they had before.
We'll probably see that in the next slide, which is more like the all the touch points that play a role, both direct and indirect, on-site and off-site. So maybe to wrap up this part, because the ecosystem is not complete. On one side, obviously, you have the hotels that, and we'll see some of the numbers that sell partially, and it depends, and you will explain that later, partially on what kind of hotel, how do you fit in, what part will be sold directly and indirectly versus indirectly. But on the right-hand side, there's not such a thing like a single travel intermediary, right? There's no travel agency is actually also a very diverse number of business models, ranging from more on the corporate travel side, travel management companies, corporate travel agencies, the more leisure online travel agencies, the high street or brick and mortar travel agencies, but also B2B. And there's James. B2B, more on the bed bank side, we'll come to that later. Marketplaces, tour operators that buy in bulk and then sell as part of packages, and also destination management companies. James, great that you could make it. I hope that the journey from the airport was not too painful.
Thank you.
Yeah, but so we just got started. We basically explained a bit about the background of the session, and we started with the hospitality landscape. Things very well known to you. So, and Anna did a great job explaining that. But before we move on, maybe you can do a quick introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Paul. Hi, Anna. Good to be here. So James Lemon, I'm Stripe's global head of all things hospitality and travel. Been here about 3 years after a career in the industry. So spent time at IHG Hotels and Resorts and Travelport and in and out of hospitality startups, both my own and other people's. Yeah, absolutely delighted to be here. So Stripe, for those of you that don't know, is a large kind of payments infrastructure company. So it's a really strategic and exciting time, I think, for payments now. They touch so many parts of the hospitality experience, both for guests and our staff. And I think there's a real transformation underway. People are really thinking about modernizing kind of payment technologies in order to drive more direct bookings, really think about ancillaries or capturing more trip spend, and of course, keeping things efficient and productive for staff. So I'm sure we'll touch on a few of those over the next 45 minutes or so. So feel free to continue, and yeah, delighted to be here.
Okay, I'll hand it over to you in a bit to explain more about unified commerce and how all things come together. But maybe just from a sizing perspective, I was looking up some numbers here, and I use Skift's research on this from State of Travel 2024. But it's mind blowing, right? The size of the global industry, hospitality industry, hotel revenues, 1 trillion and growing, right? So it is on one side, very global, but it's also very fragmented. I think that's when I compare it, to other part of my area of interest, like the airline industry, which is well, there's maybe 400 or 500 airlines worldwide, and they're organized under like IATA, and a lot of it is standardized. Not so much for the hotel industry, or not at all for the hotel industry, right? And I think that's one of the key challenges that also the payment industry faces when dealing with hospitality, is how to manage that. But I'm pretty sure that James will elaborate on that later on as well. And maybe, James, this is also good for you to jump in as well. So we already touched a little bit on, on what you see here at the right-hand side at the bottom, the type of hotels. Well, in short, very many different ones. But if we maybe change the view of on this and look at it more from a property level perspective, and how do these bookings and payments come together, and what plays a role. I think one thing that I put on here at the bottom is guest centric, and that's what I've always learned from my sessions with Hepna, is always like, try to take it away, at least not try to think from a payment perspective like the currency or the form of payment from the hotel, but if you sell online, try to also then think, where is the customer base and how would they like to pay. That might be different than what the hotel can accept on property. So, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit on the unified commerce, or the omni-channel aspect of nowadays of accepting payments across all these touch points. If it's the spa, if it's the bar, if it's the mini bar, if it's even the vending machine in the hallway, and how does it all come together?
No, thanks, Paul. I think this can probably feel a bit like an overwhelming slide to start with, but I think you've done a great job of putting the world's kind of payment touch points in hotels on a page. I think where I draw people's eyes is definitely kind of down the left-hand side here. If you think about a direct booking, the way it's been over the last probably 20 years is the customer sticking their credit card in your checkout. Often the hotel is doing nothing with that. They're really just kind of getting the details at the front desk, and then they're only using those details if the guest doesn't show up. What they're actually doing is waiting for the guest to show up, taking their physical card and charging that. And that's typically been because just these are the way things have always been in a kind of pre-e-commerce world. So one of the big changes in payments at the moment, which I think is incredibly guest-centric, is this idea that the e-commerce purchase can actually be really enhanced. And that doesn't mean prepay, by the way. You could still be just authorizing a card that you then will, without getting too jargony, you'll tokenize it, and you'll be able to use it again, when the guest arrives, or when they check out, or as you say, when they make an ancillary purchase. But I think you're seeing hotel chains like Accor and Best Western, who are both with Stripe, is really thinking, actually, that checkout is a really important part of my marketing funnel, where I've got a chance to kind of put a frictionless experience in front of the customer. And yes, some people still want to pay by credit card, and that takes hundreds of small optimizations, but others will want to pay with an Apple Pay or Google Pay wallet just to get that one-click checkout. Others might want to spread the cost of their stay with something like a Klarna or an Affirm, or just paying in installments before their arrival date. So having these kind of options that we're probably more familiar with in retail, but pop up in the hotel space, can really help to drive those direct bookings. What's happening behind the scenes, which I think you're touching on here, is when the guest then shows up, they don't need to get their card out again. That's been saved in the system, and the hotel can effectively just charge it. Or the guest might just tap on a terminal at the front desk, and that would bring up the entire guest profile, which includes any money they've already put down, previous stay histories, etc. And we're all really familiar with ancillaries during the stay, mostly in F&B, where we're constantly signing for things, particularly perhaps in the US, where it's just kind of signatures all the way through your stay. Again, that's a process we could completely transform. We could allow people to kind of tap throughout their stay with a card, or if they're in a resort, you might kind of put an NFC bracelet on them, or do some really exciting things. But effectively, hotels, I think, are going to be thinking much more about ancillary spend. So again, you've got a great circle here that I'll draw people's attention to, where you're thinking about F&B, spa bookings, golf tee-off times, even kind of a marketplace of your local ancillaries. Think about tours, activities, theatre tickets, transfers, parking, all these kind of things you might want to sell around the hotel. So you're creating lots of little mini purchase moments. And again, if they're online, that can just be a kind of one-click checkout, just charging the same card again. And if they're in person, again, it's something that you can just, you can just add to a folio with the kind of swipe of a card, or you can take care of it there and then. So we're definitely seeing hotels really start to think about revenues that they can drive through kind of new payment touch points. And then I guess the last thing I'd touch on here, which I know we're going to dive into, is if you were getting the customer indirect, obviously we're seeing a lot of virtual cards being used in this space that you might be getting from your travel management companies or your OTAs. Again, we'll talk a little bit about marketplaces. I think even that world can be automated and made a lot more efficient. But that's kind of the dominant way things are done. And I think you captured it really well.
Okay. And what I also added here, and because it's quite a unique payment flow, if you like, if you arrive on the property, that typically the most common scenario is probably that you hand over your card, like you said, and that a deposit is taken. It's not charged yet, because let's say in this example the reservation is for €250. Some amount is added on top of that just for incidentals, right? For ancillaries. Let's say, for this argument's sake, it's then a hold is put on the card of total €300. Again, it's just blocked on your spending limit, so you can't spend elsewhere, so that it's guaranteed at the time of checkout that €300 can be captured. But if due to spending during your stay, you go over that amount, then, and that's not so common in the payment industry, then an incremental hold, so additional amount is then also authorized, is blocked, so that at the time of final billing, and that in this particular example is 325, the total amount can be captured, which is above the originally authorized, pre-authorized amount. So that's quite unique. You don't see that a lot in other sectors in travel. Maybe with an Uber ride or with a taxi. There's some other examples there as well. And I think you touched on that as well, that I think that's still a painful thing, right? If you make a reservation and you're supposed to pay a check-in or check-out, in the end you don't show, then typically the terms and conditions say that you have to pay for the first night, but then you have to have access to the details, and you also have to process in such a way that also the issuer will allow it to go through, and that it won't be reversed, right? So that's also an aspect that plays a role.
Yeah, that's right. And again, a lot of what you're describing has been around for many, many years. And it does feel quite nuanced for the hotel industry. I think it's definitely hotel-centric, perhaps, rather than guest-centric. And I think what we're seeing now is, again, the beauty of kind of payments as software, if you like, with Stripe, is you do have that optionality. You can recreate those processes if you want to in a more efficient way, but you can also change processes. So we are seeing hotels who, rather than thinking about incremental holds, are just kind of charging cards as guests go. If you order your in-room dining, they just use the save token and just charge the card again. Similar if you're in the restaurant or take a spa booking or need to pay for your parking. That's typically what we'll see in other industries as well. You don't have to do this now that payments is one tap and is so efficient. You don't have to do this incidentals and adding everything to the folio. Okay. But again, it's up to hotels. I think
more legacy way of doing things.
It'll take time for things to change, and you have those options.
Okay.
I think as well as bringing, the different needs together, the hotel needs and the guest needs, and being able to offer everything, right, James? So that if they want to use tokens, or the guest wants to use tokens, that option is available. Or if they want to prepay a deposit, that is there as well. I think the important thing, and just because Paul, we talked about this before the session, is that it's important for hotels that if they want to use this pre-op and then continue increasing that up, that they do it within one transaction, because otherwise multiple amounts can be held on the guest's account, which can be frustrating for guests, especially if the hold is way higher than the one they were expecting to have.
I'm definitely not a terminal expert, but my understanding is that it's more part of the functionality than terminal offers, or if it's a virtual terminal or a physical terminal, and that not so common in e-commerce. Maybe, Anna, to continue, and before we go into more detail on the B2B side, maybe it's good to elaborate a little bit on, I show on the top right-hand side, like B2B payments, but there's also a pass-through, maybe the agency model and the merchant model, just a quick introduction so that's also clear.
Yeah, absolutely. So also we are staying on this slide, right? So
just a high-level introduction, then we go into detail later on. Yeah, absolutely.
So the travel intermediary, they have two models to operate. One is where they act as a merchant of record. That means in our world that they take payment from the traveler as well as handling the booking on their behalf with the hotel in this case. And when the travel intermediary takes the payment from the traveler, then they use their own payment method to pay the hotel. That can be via bank transfer or ACH after receiving an invoice from the hotel, or it can be in the form of a virtual card, which is just like a regular card, but on a visual form that the hotel can process like any other card. Then there is another model, which in the industry we call agency model. And in that model, the travel intermediary would manage the booking on behalf of the traveler with the hotel. But instead of taking payment, they will take the card details, the payment details from the traveler and passing them to the hotel. To Jane's point, the first model gives more flexibility to the travel intermediary to offer multiple payment options to the travelers. So James was mentioning Klarna or other payment methods that are becoming more popular. With the second model, the payment methods that can be offered to the traveler for now are a bit limited.
Yeah, correct. Okay, let's continue because otherwise we'll have the same time crunch as you, Anna, in your session, and there's so much to discuss. But talking about the different distribution channels, so the direct sales versus indirect sales. You use these stats as well, Anna, in your session, by the way. And I won't go into too much detail because there are quite a lot of different flavors there. But I thought you gave a very good explanation about that. Let's assume that it's roughly 50-50 overall, according to this survey. It's not based on, let's say, global data, but it's a survey with 129 hotel companies. But I thought it was good to understand that it might be skewed towards one side or the other, depending on if it's a chain hotel or if it's more like an individually owned property, right? Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, and please, James and Paul, feel free to jump in and add to what I'm saying. So we've got the direct sale channel in the hotel industry. That means when the traveler interacts directly to the hotel to make the booking, and that can be online and offline. So offline, and there is a description here, but in general terms, offline will be when they make a phone call or when they reserve like for example, an event, and a room comes with that booking. And online is on the digital channels, right? It could be the website, or it could be Facebook, or it could be any of those. Then you have the indirect sales channel, which is when there is a travel intermediary managing the reservation between the traveler and the hotel. And the indirect sales channel has evolved quite a bit in the last few years. Originally, it was travel agencies, and that was in the early 1900s, believe it or not. But now it's evolved into many different flavors. So you have OTAs, you have travel, corporate travel agencies, and you've got new players that are coming quite strong in the market, which are like the wholesalers or also known bed banks. And one thing that really struck me out when I saw this survey that was only published in November is that the bed bank sector was growing faster than the OTA. So there is obviously a shift in the distribution in the hotel ecosystem, and there are some waves happening there in the way they manage their content and how they partner with the different travel intermediaries. As you were saying, right? This survey they contacted 129 properties, both independent hotels and hotel chains. But when we've gone into, when we've done deeper analysis in the past, you could see that independent hotels, particularly hotels that are not associated to, brands like it could be Global Hotel Alliance or, leading hotels of the world, they have a much higher dependency on travel intermediaries. So the average, when we looked into more detailed data, independent hotels could have anything from 80 to 60% of the bookings coming from the travel intermediaries. On the other side, when you were looking at the hotel chains, the dependency was much lower, right? So the average was 40% travel intermediaries, 60% direct bookings. Now, this percentage was even lower for hotel chains that had very developed and very sophisticated loyalty programs, such as Marriott with Bonvoy. And in the case of Marriott, for example, travel intermediaries represented 33% of their bookings and 67% was direct bookings. So as you can see, a couple of things I think that are important to highlight here is that loyalty programs with substantial benefits to travelers obviously drive direct sales. That's the first thing. The second thing is that direct sales and indirect sales can change slightly depending on the region where the traveler is based. But having said that, even though US, for example, is more direct sales orientated than other regions, but you can see that the other regions are also appreciating more loyalty programs. So there is, it's worth for hotels to explore this irrespective of where they are. And the reason I'm saying this is because a question that comes up quite frequently. And the third thing is that, even though you have an independent hotel, and James, please chip in here, even though you may be an independent hotel and you may think that, you're not part of a brand or anything like that, it's still worth having some sort of loyalty program or program whereby you engage with your customers, because that brings repeat businesses.
And I think that reminds me also that I made a comment in one of my on the previous slide with all the columns, that representation companies, they typically also, if it's a romantic hotels in Germany or whatever, it's more a type of hotel or small luxury hotels or world hotels, but they also group together a lot of these individually or small chains with a certain theme, right, or a certain luxury level or whatever, or certain business model. By the way, I did get it. Sorry, James, just quickly, short answer. So the question was, how do bed banks differ from wholesale? They're part of wholesale, right? It's a subcategory of wholesale. So it's bed banks, tour operators, and GDS. They are all part of wholesale aggregators, but they're different flavor. Sorry, go ahead, James.
Yeah, I think a really interesting discussion. I think the key really is that there is actually no right answer. Whether you're running an individual hotel or a portfolio of hotels, whatever you do for a career, the answer for your chain will be different. I think that there is definitely a trend towards more book direct strategies, because you can get hold of that customer data, you can control the experience, and whether it's loyalty or just retention, by delivering a great experience, you'll have more chance of winning that customer back again. And generally, those direct channels are seen as slightly lower cost because you're not paying commissions, but they're incredibly valuable third-party channels, both for driving guests who otherwise wouldn't see your hotels, or obviously corporate channels where it's very unlikely you're going to get, you really shouldn't be trying to get customers to book direct if they should be booking through their travel management company. So there is no right answer here. I think the key thing is really, are you optimizing your kind of rate and occupancy? And of course, are you focused on those guests that will have then the highest level of ancillary sales? One thing I would say, though, is that in every channel, payments is going to be important. So we still see people with, who are either have a call center or you're calling the hotel and they're writing down credit cards manually, and that's non-compliant and there's chances for mistakes. So we're seeing more and more now using that contact center experience where you might actually just send someone a payment link direct into their SMS or their email, and while they're on the phone to you, they can pay securely, in whatever payment method they want on an online checkout page. Or obviously you can transfer them to a secure payment line, which you may have seen as a consumer. So I think really payments is still critical in driving the experience and making sure it converts, in building trust because people may trust these third-party channels more than your hotel if they don't feel like your checkout is secure. And then, of course, there's a compliance element as well, which is however you're receiving payments, you've just got to make sure you're staying on top of kind of regulations and compliance, or handing that off to, you know, a payment partner like Stripe, just to kind of keep you ahead of it. So really interesting slide, and we could have a whole hour on this topic alone. I'm
More
sure.
than no. And maybe just to wrap it up, James, I think the travel intermediaries have become travel fintechs or hotel fintechs, and they have also like this cash-centric, you know, if it's, you know, you pay in a different currency, pay in advance, pay over time, or pay just before arrival, pay on behalf of your kids or whatever. I mean, they have added that layer of flexibility also to take a lot of, you know, of these responsibilities, if it's data security, but also the whole conversion side, out of the hands of the hotel, and they can basically outsource it, and they do a great job on that, right? I always use the example of Booking.com and Expedia. I mean, they have both 2, 3, 4, 5, 600 people in payments overall, including operations. So they make a serious job out of payments, and you play a role, by the way, in a lot of these travel fintechs. Let's move on. Another one of my introductions, and I'm definitely not going to go for all these boxes, but I just want to use this as kind of a checklist or a cheat sheet to cover some of the aspects here. And or I asked Anna to explain the role between, let's say, the merchant and the agency model, which is also hidden in here. But I think there's another initiative, or maybe trend or strategy, if you like, for hotels, and that's where the chain, given the more traditional ownership structure, historically not always involved in the operational side, but more marketing mechanism, is more and more playing an active role and taking on the role of kind of an online travel agency. So maybe, James, I think we'll come to that later as well, but I think it's also one of the trends that's heavily discussed in the HETNA environment, for instance. But can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that, how you see that trend?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that for many reasons, payments in hotels has been a little bit more hotel centric. As we were saying, you know, it's about, you know, typically a hotel will make an agreement with their local bank and they'll have terminals on the front desk. And that has been, you know, good 90 to almost 100% of bookings. Not a lot's really happening in the e-commerce space. And I think the hotel chains have realized actually they're missing out on a few things there. They're missing out on a chance for a consistent guest experience across hotels. They're missing out on a chance to drive direct bookings by having that kind of Uber style one-click checkout. They're potentially exposing themselves to kind of regulation and compliance. And actually, they're not really able to retail. You know, they're not able to step in and maybe add insurance or secure that taxi from the airport. In fact, many hotel websites, if they have that approach, you can't even book 2 hotels in one booking because you're really just booking with the individual hotel. So I think that as people think about this e-commerce mindset, hotels have really started to embrace it now. And one of the things we can talk a little bit about is Stripe have a marketplace or an ecosystem product called Connect that is designed to give you that optionality and best of both worlds. We have a single HQ experience, let's call it, that every guest sees and touches and feels. And behind the scenes, each hotel has a sub account really with Stripe, and then the funds are kind of passed through them. And it could be a pass-through model, so the hotel can stay merchant of record, which is really important to many of the hotel chains. But you're able to give guests that kind of experience that is really high converting, trusted, and compliant.
Yes, do you also see that the hotel is actually the merchant of record collecting on behalf of the individual hotels, and then in the second step, with an account to account or in a different or a virtual card, then in a different moment, then passing on the funds to the individual hotels, maybe also depending on what kind of ownership status they have, what kind of relationships they have. Is it also, do you see that as well?
Yeah, really good question. And I think there is a bit of a transformation underway. If we look at this slide, you know, is it going to get simpler in the next 2 or 3 years? I don't know. But I think what you're describing is that different hotel chains are trying different things. And you're right, we are seeing some almost turn into a bit of an internal OTA, although that's maybe got negative connotations. But the center is really saying, look, let us take full control. And we'll get you the funds, you know, in time, but we don't want you in the flow at all, really. I think that's going to be a hard one to sell when you have a large franchise network who've got a very decades of experience in managing the payments themselves. So for me, this hybrid approach that many Stripe customers are doing, where you have a single kind of consistent checkout experience, but the hotels are online with sub accounts and they stay merchant record. For me, that feels the most palatable right now. And other hotels, frankly, are not even ready to start looking at this. They're saying, actually, no, it's just a bit too complicated, and we're not sure if payments is strategic enough for us right now. So we're just going to leave it as it is. We're just going to have this kind of at hotel experience. I think that's a shame. I think they're missing out on big opportunities to drive more direct bookings and be more productive. But it's a really interesting hot topic at the moment. I think I'd recommend every hotel chain that's in this space to really think about payments as software. And as you think about your technology stack, think actually, what kind of experiences do we want? And should we be having more strategic conversations about how we show up to guests and how we manage this behind the scenes?
Anna, anything you would like to add to this one from your perspective?
Yeah, no, I think that from our perspective, there are hundreds of thousands of hotels out there. And for us in MasterCard, it's paramount to create payment solutions that work for the needs of the buyers. In this case, I'm going to focus on the travel intermediaries because that's my main domain. I'll leave the B2C to James. And hotels, irrespective of who they are and how they manage payments. Reality is the hotel industry or the hotel ecosystem is quite big and large. You have hotels everywhere in the world. You have hotels in very developed or not developed. I don't like to use that word, but technologically advanced areas like US or Europe. And then you have hotels in very small markets, very remote areas where acceptance is a challenge, right? So for us, our focus is how we can create solutions that simplify the payments between the buyers and the hotels, automate them to the extent that is possible, because to James' point, the more manual, the more manual intervention and the more that there is exposure of card details, the more risks there are. But we are very mindful that there are many different needs from the hotel side and how we marry the two worlds. How can we bring innovation and how can we bring, payment methods that are seamless and automated without compromising or without asking too much of hotels? Because I come from the hotel world. I worked in hotels as well for many, many, many years. I wasn't a payment expert back then. And I can tell you, I've done horrible things like writing down card numbers on a piece of paper.
Receiving faxes.
Forgive me now. But yeah, no, absolutely. I wasn't aware of what I was doing. To me, I was trying to create an experience for the guests that was quick and that was going to guarantee them that payment or that booking or that, whatever it was. And so I think the hotel industry will get to the point of, online retailers for sure. But I think it's going to be a progress that is steady and it's going to be gradual. I don't think it's going to happen overnight because there is a lot of change and a lot of transformation that needs to happen. And that's fine. That's the beauty of this industry and why we enjoy it so much. But that's why we, instead of trying to, for ourselves, we are thinking about how can we adapt to the different players so that we create one single point of connection, but with different models that adapt to all the different players.
Yeah, makes sense. And my infographical shows that there are different viewpoints. There's different business models. If it's corporate, is way different than leisure, and direct, different than indirect and bed bank. So yeah, there's a lot of use cases to cover to come to a all-encompassing solution. I'm just keeping an eye on the questions here. My good friend Josep asked, it's also important to, or mentions, it's also important not to forget that it's very common in hotel industry that the booking credit card is not the credit card that's being used at checkout or to pay. I think it's a two-step, potentially a two-step. It could be one, but it can also be a two-step process, right? From your a question from Jared, from your experience, what features do hotels and intermediaries value most in the payment method? Are they any alternative payment options that are standing out by meeting specific needs? And I think That's a very valid question. If you look at the infographic here, I have two little post-its here. One is the factors for the agent, because in the end, there's two sides. You take two to tango to come to a balanced approach. And so what's important for the agent might not necessarily be exactly the same what's important for the hotel, right? But I try to summarize them here. Obviously, the process, the protection, the cost, and not to forget, but also reconciliation and the chance of fraud. So there are quite a lot of factors that play a role. I'll come back to the questions in a bit. Because time is moving on. So going back to the payment rails in hospitality, and I think you already touched a little bit on it, but I think you made an important point here, Anna, also from my perspective. It's global, it's multi-channel, and you need rails that pretty much work all the time everywhere, right? It needs to be like water coming out of the tap. It needs to work. And if you can stick to existing rails and add functionality to it, that's always helpful, and it's always better than coming up with something completely new that you have to introduce from scratch. But maybe for those that are new or not very well aware of how virtual cards work, can you give a very short summary of the process here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Paul was asking this question, so we come right on time to answer it.
Okay, well, there you go. Yeah, I see it. Yeah.
That was perfect timing. So the traveler would, as I was explaining, a couple of slides ago, the traveler would go to the travel agency to book their hotel. And once they've made the choice of the hotel they want to book and have confirmed the dates and, the type of room that they want, they will pay the travel agency directly. As James was saying, travel intermediaries do a great job at adjusting to the traveler that is interacting with them by offering them multiple payment methods, not just cards. It can be bank transfer solutions. It can be buy now, pay later solutions. It can be even crypto solutions, right? We've seen this recently. It can also be subscriptions. Some travel agencies and some airlines are, offering subscription-based services. So once the payment is confirmed from the travel agency side, they will send the booking request to the hotel to formalize that booking, and they would, indicate what payment method they want to use to settle that transaction. That payment method will be the travel agency's own payment method, and in this case, it's a virtual card. What's the beauty of the virtual card? One thing I think that is important to note, and James made a reference to this, is that the systems that hotels use today are the same systems that they used 20 years ago. And they are mainly built to support card information because that's, originally how it worked, but also because most payments happened at check-in or checkout. So even if there was card information being transferred, the payment was happening, when the check-in or checkout activity happened. So the good thing about virtual cards is that using the current hotel systems, the information of the virtual card can travel with the booking information. So the moment the hotel gets the booking request, they also have the virtual card information attached to it. They can, in many times, it travels directly into the property management system that we talked about. They can just leave the information as it is. And once the guest checks in or the guest checks out, depending on the agreement between the travel agency and the hotel can charge the room cost and the tax to that card. I think Giuseppe made a very good point in there, and is that, sometimes you need to have two cards. So in the case of having a virtual card, it's important that hotels also ask for a card for incidentals if the traveler wants to post charges in the room. Same as what Giuseppe was mentioning on the B2C use case, right? But other than that, it's very simple because there is already a card to guarantee in the room and the tax. So the receptionist can welcome the guests when they come in and just ask for another card if the guest wants to charge incidentals in the room. If not, they have the tap-in model that James was alluding to, or any other payment methods across the property.
Okay. Yes. So maybe I already mentioned briefly there are two viewpoints, right? And but continue where I interrupted you, but maybe you can then lead into this one as well.
Yeah, no, this one is a bit scary, so I'm going to simplify it for everyone. And so there are some benefits that virtual cards provide to travel intermediaries as well as to travel merchants. We often forget to explain the benefits to travel merchants, so I'm going to do this today. From a financial perspective, travel intermediaries, they can have, payment methods arranged with their bank that suit them best in terms of, if they need credit or if they need delayed payment options, etc. So this is a big benefit for travel intermediaries, particularly those ones that need credit lines. A good example for this will be bed banks, because bed banks pay first the hotel and then afterwards they get paid. So credit plays a big role for them because it allows them to continue operating and continue buying while they wait to get paid. Also, obviously, there are some cost efficiencies that it comes with the automation of virtual cards, because they don't need someone to receive an invoice from the hotel and executing it. Everything is automated. They send the card gets created automatically, and the card gets settled in the POS by the hotel. From the travel merchant perspective, if they get paid by a virtual card, they're going to get paid earlier, because they will get paid either at check-in or check-out. Most often, the model is check-in. Whereas if they were to get paid by bank transfer, they will have to issue an invoice first. The travel intermediary will have to execute it and send a bank transfer. And again, there is automation. So they don't need to have someone issuing invoices. And even if they have a solution that issues invoices on their behalf, someone needs to review those invoices. So there is obviously cost savings in the automation, as well as increase in the indirect sales. Because if travel merchants are able to accept the payment method that travel intermediaries prefer, they are going to they're going to do their best to sell the content that these travel merchants have in their platforms. Operationally, we touched a little bit on this in the previous box, by mentioning automation on both sides. And the automation comes from the generation of the payment, the processing of the payment, as well as the reconciliation. So in the travel intermediary side, the moment the virtual card is charged, they get a report that they can upload in the ERP system, and the reconciliation gets done automatically. On the travel merchant side, the booking gets marked as paid the moment that they process the payment on the POS. So again, the reconciliation will be automated as well. And of course, you have also the element on you minimize the manual and human errors, so that that also simplifies the operations and the amount of involvement from both the travel intermediary and the travel merchant side. One thing that really surprised me when I talked to hotels, because we did our own survey, is that the amount of errors that happened when there is invoice processing and the amount of days that it takes for that to be resolved. So they told us that it was an average of 7 days to get one of these issues resolved. So that's a lot of time. Risk, travel intermediaries that have the chargeback protection. On the travel merchant side, also they have great benefits on reducing fraud, because the levels of fraud in virtual cards are virtually zero. And by that mean, it's obviously not zero, because that's impossible, but the latest rate that we have was 0.0001%. So very, very small. And also it reduces the non-payment risk, right? Because as you were explaining, Paul, the moment the virtual card is activated, they can put a auth on the card, hold the funds, and those funds will be guaranteed until they charge the card. Important to highlight though, that auths have a maximum amount of time of 30 days. So please, hotels, don't forget to charge your auths. But as long as they do it within that time period, they are guaranteed their funds. And flexibility, and I'm going to finish very quickly with this one. But a couple of things that are important for our particular program is that we have we have a large amount of currencies available for travel intermediaries to pay the hotels and for hotels to receive the payments. So that reduces the foreign exchange costs. But also our program has different interchange tiers, which is basically acceptance costs. So what does that mean for hotels and travel intermediaries? That means that if, for example, a hotel considers that a card that's been used by the travel intermediary has a high acceptance cost, they can sit down with a travel intermediary and discuss with them other acceptance costs that we have under this program that suits best their operationality and also the cost that they can take on when processing one of these payments. So, we don't get involved in those discussions, but at least we give the tools and we give the products to enable those conversations between travel intermediaries and hotels.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Anna. And I just got in a question from my good friend Suhail. Yes, Suhail, it's recorded. It will be available soon. He was late to the game. Okay, let's continue. And James, you already explained a little bit about Stripe Connect. We looked at it, and maybe you can just explain a little bit the different use cases that I share here on this slide. So the different business model where this model, this marketplace model, as I call it, can be applied. So maybe you can explain a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Look, I think we all know travel's been an ecosystem for as long as any of us have been in the industry. And what Stripe has worked on for about 15 years, and is probably the technology behind your favorite ride-sharing app or your favorite food delivery app, is an ecosystem set of technologies called Connect. And effectively, it means that any party can onboard onto a digital platform. And then you or the party in the middle can control splitting funds, paying out funds, collecting fees, and everyone can manage performance, can manage transparency, has data analytics. It's an incredibly different way to manage money B2B. And so what are some of the use cases in travel, as you mentioned? Well, look, I think hotel chains can use this in order to manage payments and payouts to all of their franchisees and create that one consistent guest experience and then pay out. So that's exactly what we're doing here. You can see with Accor and people like Best Western. Platforms can also use it. So it might be a PMS like Muse. It might be a kind of operating system for travel agents like WeTravel, but they can do exactly the same thing. They can turn around to their customers and say, hey, let us help you manage this central system. So a lot of technology companies are actually embedding Stripe payments into their tech stack and having a payments module, if you like, to manage this. We're seeing OTAs use it. To people like Hostelworld and Booking.com might be onboarding their hotels to Stripe Connect, and either as well as or instead of virtual cards, using that for their B2B payments. Or we're having hotel chains that are building, say, a tours and activities platform. They're saying, look, we want 15 providers in our local area. Well, they can all on board. And then from your central checkout, or your concierge app or whatever, you can kind of pass money and do your revenue shares behind the scenes. So it's just great for those kind of B2B partnerships, capturing more trip spend, but really having a centralized system. Look, for me, it's a great technology to modernize how we think about hospitality, hotel groups, and the ecosystem. It helps people have a global approach to payments while being kind of very locally relevant. You can tag onto it other Stripe products like our in-person terminals at the hotel, or like a subscriptions product, or we also issue virtual cards, so you can use that too. And it's this kind of best of both worlds, really, a consistent experience for the guest, however they want to show up, app, web, call center, wherever wherever they are in the world, but it gives this kind of local optionality for chains to potentially leave control in the hands of hoteliers. So yeah, very, very exciting product, and I think it can really be as creative as travel customers want to be with it.
Okay. And what I already mentioned early on as well is that in this value chain, in this travel fintech, hotel fintech, you see like a Muse, a PMS, or a tour operator platform like WeTravel making payments part of their core proposition, right? What was more like something downstream now is embedded into their proposition, and they play a way more active role than before in it.
I think that's right, and I think that's good for hoteliers because obviously, take those independent hotels or small chains. They don't have dedicated technology teams, so they want to be able to turn around to technology partners like a Cloudbed, SiteMinder, or a Muse and say, "Look, can you help me with this? It is inefficient. We've been doing it the same way." I think part of buying that next generation of technology is, hey, they've solved payments for you in an integrated way that sits in a dashboard that your staff can use, and it's just incredibly simple. So yeah, really exciting time, I think.
Okay, good stuff. Before we go to, I have one more question. We'll come to that, Sam, in a bit. We'll wrap up with some industry news. So, there's some interesting news coming from Finland. Actually, they've partnered recently with Camino Network blockchain and a chain for travel to work on a model to actually move money between travel agencies in exotic countries, typically non-IATA BSP countries, as it's called, to move money over stablecoin, blockchain rails from the travel agency to the airline. And so that's you can look it up. There's a video online as well. I think that's an interesting development that we'll definitely touch on maybe in the B2B session as well that we have at the end of this series. And the other one is, and we don't have much time anymore, but maybe you can just very briefly explain, James, because you brought this one in.
Absolutely.
What this means.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So look, as we mentioned earlier, I think there is a rise for new channels that hoteliers will have to manage. We talked about an example of maybe Hopper turning your bank into an OTA. But I think, we all know customers are using AI for trip planning. Hey, how should I fill my itinerary, or what should I do while I'm in town? Critically, and I think sooner than people thought, this will now be bookable. So Stripe and Perplexity have launched a new product where you can search for things on Perplexity, and directly in the thread, the AI agent, as we call it, you can now book it. So Stripe have released an SDK, so anyone working with an AI agent could make that experience bookable. So I think as hoteliers, we now really need to think about how our content's showing up in AI. I think we really need to think about that as a channel to try and drive direct bookings, but be prepared that some of these will be indirect bookings, and we need to kind of have a clear strategy for that. So yeah, really exciting development, and I think lots more to come, probably quicker than we thought.
Okay. And it's funny because I keep a what I call a buzzword bingo, and for a number of years, let's say blockchain and digital currencies, central bank digital currencies were on there. It was until very recently very quiet, and AI, because also AI had taken over. But now they seem both to fight for the attention, and they're in the spotlight both. So exciting times in that area.
That's right.
Okay. We've done most of the Q&A during the session. I have one more from Sam Jarsma. It sounds very Dutch. It's about the alternatives to cards, virtual cards. For instance, if it's account to account or digital currencies. And maybe my question is very short. That I also keep like a scorecard, both for airlines and for hotels, by the way. And from a hotel perspective, also from a customer perspective and consumer perspective, what are the pros and cons? And in the end, it's a mix, right? You win some, you lose some. But for instance, if it's reconciliation or a payment guarantee, or the time it takes for money to be received, there are quite a lot of factors that play a role. And I think Anna explained as well that although yes, there is a price tag to virtual cards, but it also comes with a lot of value, right? It's a value exchange. So as long as both parties see the added value of the payment mechanism and make it part of their bilateral agreement, I think we're good. But there are definitely alternatives, and we touched on digital currencies. If it's account to account, open banking, the wallets that for countries, let's say in Southeast Asia, stuff like that. There's a lot of things happening. So exciting times. Having said that, we've run a little bit over, but James, you were a bit late to the party, so great that you could make it in the end. And Anna, thank you for joining as well. And always good to hear you two sort of experts talking, so passionate about payments in the hospitality space. So thank you again for joining. And the last thing that I would like to mention actually is that I haven't set a date yet, but we're shooting for January. Next section will be about fraud and risk management. So credit risk and fraud risk, and that will happen next month. And with that, I would like to close the session. Thanks again, and wishing you all happy holidays, and see you in the new year. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
having us.
Happy holidays.
Thanks, everyone.